What's up everybody and welcome to the Gooner channel, a channel 100% dedicated to the Arsenal, who as we all know are by far the greatest team the world has ever seen. Certainly having the greatest transfer window this season. Hasn't always been like that though. And what I thought I'd do today is, while we're all in a good mood and everyone's buzzing with all the imminent signings, now I know Jurrien Timber isn't confirmed at the point of making this video, but his brothers accidentally leaked a photograph of his leaving do where there's a picture of him in an Arsenal shirt. So I think we can say that's done. Both West Ham and Arsenal have admitted that the deal for Declan Rice is done and all but waiting for the picture of him holding up the shirt. And of course, Kai Havertz has joined Arsenal in a 60 to 65 million pound deal. It's been a great transfer window. We've spent 200 million. Gone are the old days of Arsenal penny pinching. But what I wanted to look at while we're in a good mood is the biggest flop in Arsenal's transfer history, the one that really has us all scratching our heads. As Nicolas Pèpè enters the last season of his contract, it looks almost certain that no one's going to want to sign him for big money, given that he had a particularly average loan spell away at Nice last season. It's looking ever more likely that Arsenal is going to buy out his contract and Nicolas Pèpè can go on and find a new club. So what went wrong? Well, I don't think you can really understand what went wrong in the Nicolas Pèpè saga unless you go all the way back to 2017-2018, which was, of course, Arsene Wenger's last season in charge of Arsenal. The summer transfer window, that at the start of that season, saw two players coming into Arsenal. One was Sead Kolasinac from Schalke, a strong wing-back, left-back that gave us all a bit of hope that he was going to be physical and strong and a good defender. And Alexander Lacazette, who of course only just left at the end of last season and was a good servant to Arsenal, if not quite as prolific as we'd wanted him to be. What's interesting about this though? Well, there's a couple of things that are interesting about this. One of the key things that's interesting is that actually Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was being offered to Arsenal very strongly. He wanted to come to Arsenal. Dick Law, Arsenal's transfer chief, and Arsene Wenger made the decision instead to go for Alexander Lacazette and turned down the chance to sign Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. But these weren't the only transfers that were supposed to happen. By this point, Alexis Sanchez was heading into the last year of his contract and would of course be able to leave for free in a year's time. Man City tabled a £60 million bid for him. And Arsenal were intending to use that £60 million to go after Thomas Lemar, who was a much talked about, much vaunted and high profile winger, playing really well for the French national squad and playing really well for Monaco. He was one of Europe's most sought after players. And the deal collapsed at the last minute, according to Dick Law, because of the dithering of Arsene Wenger. So Arsenal went into that season holding on to Alexis Sanchez and not signing Thomas Lemar. Now, on to the start of the season, and Arsenal beat Chelsea in the Community Shield on penalties, and they win their opening game 4-3 against Leicester, with Lacazette scoring in the second minute. So a fantastic debut. After that, not so great. In fact, Arsenal then go on to lose 1-0 away to Stoke and get an absolute drubbing at Anfield 4-0. All of the hope and optimism that would have been engendered by a better transfer window starting to fade. This is the end of the Arsene Wenger era. There are plenty of people calling for his head, and this is a period, the 4-0 defeat to Liverpool is just another in a long line of defeats to clubs in the top 4 or 5 that we really just weren't playing well against at all. Now, by the time we get to the January transfer window, things are looking a bit ropey in the league. Inconsistencies, defeats to teams that we shouldn't have lost to. One good example of that is an away defeat to Watford. It's starting to look a little bit precarious. Now, interestingly enough, not long after the sort of dithering and kind of inconclusive transfer window, Dick Law actually resigns as Arsenal's transfer chief. And he has been a stalwart pro-Wenger in the boardroom. And with him going, Wenger loses a real ally. And he is replaced by Sven Mislintat of Borussia Dortmund, a highly respected scout and finder of talent, and Raul Sanllehi, who comes from Barcelona. Bit of a cloud over him and some allegations that I'm not going to go into too much because they are just that. But he comes and this duo take over the Arsenal transfer negotiations. And even though they're not really Wenger out, it's definitely starting to seem like a new guard has taken over. And if you wanted further proof of that, in January, the decision is made to sign Aubameyang. Now, the signing of Aubameyang is not necessarily against Arsene Wenger's will, but it's clear he wasn't in favour of that signing at all. But Aubameyang had been at Dortmund, Mislintat knew him really well, he was very much in favour of it, so you start to get the feeling that Arsene Wenger's opinions are less important than they have been for a while. The other players to come in are Mavropanos, which again is a Mislintat signing, a player that was supposed to have a lot of potential, young Greek player. And Man City may not have bought Alexis Sanchez, but at last minute he goes to Manchester United in a swap deal with Mkhitaryan coming the other way. Now, those signings are the transfers in, but there are a wave of transfers out. Sanchez, of course, but Coquelin, Giroud, and Walcott, who, trivia fact, is actually the most selected player of the Arsene Wenger regime. He's the player that got the most minutes under Arsene Wenger. Crazy, but true. Now, the rest of the season continues pretty much as it was. We go out of the FA Cup to Nottingham Forest, which was a bit of a disaster. But there are great runs. We get to the League Cup final and we get to the Europa League semi-final. So quite a way through this 2018 period, it looks like we might snatch some kind of success from a season which is otherwise quite lackluster. The decision, though, had apparently been made in January and was relayed to Arsene Wenger by Ivan Gazidis, who's then CEO, and the Kroenkes. Now, I just want to tail off here a little bit. Stan Kroenke had always been a huge fan of Arsene Wenger, and it was very much him that was driving the fact that Arsene Wenger stayed in the job. There had been protests and continued to be protests, but with the saga around Alexis Sanchez and the concomitant saga around Ozil, who was given a huge contract to keep him at the club, it started to feel to Stan Kroenke that the time had come to make a change. That was relayed to Arsene Wenger, and his departure was announced in April, but it had been known about a little while before. It was Arsene Wenger's decision to retire, but let's put it this way. If he hadn't have done, he would have been sacked. Arsene spoke later about it and said he'd wanted to stay on to the end of his contract. That wasn't an option. And I think looking back on it that I have some regrets around this era. I was never in the Arsene Wenger out camp, but then I'd experienced the 98 season and all the seasons of Arsene Wenger's tenure, and I felt a great loyalty to a man who had given us so much. I do appreciate, though, that for some of the Arsenal fans, by the time Wenger left, hadn't experienced that firsthand, and for them, there was a clamour for change. The Kroenkes had respected that. Now, at the end of the season, Arsene Wenger unfortunately went out of the Europa League semi-final to Atletico and lost the League Cup final to Man City. He left, everyone gave him his blessing. Of course, with a club like Arsenal, there were a lot of people lined up to be his successor. In the papers, we heard about Max Allegri, who was at Juventus, Brendan Rodgers, who was at that time at Celtic, Joachim Löw, as well as Vieira, and Mikel Arteta, who was, of course, coaching at Manchester City, had no experience. What it came down to, in the end, was a name out of nowhere. Unai Emery, who had been hugely successful, 3 Europa League finals in a row that he'd won, had been at Paris Saint-Germain, won 7 trophies in a 2-year spell, including Ligue 1, but didn't deliver them European glory. And of course, that's what the PSG project is all about. So he had not had his contract renewed and was available. It came down to Arteta, who Stan Kroenke really quite liked, and Unai Emery, who said all the right things in the interview. Stan Kroenke had had a huge amount of success with the Rams in the NFL franchise by going for a young firebrand coach with a vision. And he almost went with Arteta, but in the end felt that at 37 he was just too young and that European football is not like American football and it wouldn't work. So the decision was made to hand Unai Emery the job. But it wasn't a job like Arsene Wenger had. Sven Mislintat and Raul Sanllehi would be doing most of the negotiating for transfers. Now, it's not entirely clear to me if Unai Emery had any input at all in the transfers that came in at the start of his first season at Arsenal. Let's have a quick look down the list. Bernd Leno from Leverkusen, Socrates from Dortmund, Torreira, who had been at Sampdoria, Guendouzi had been at Lorient, and Lichtsteiner, who was a kind of, well, he was reaching the end of his career, but had come from Juventus as a right back and had a tradition of winning things. Now, quite obviously, some of these are Sven Mislintat signings, and all of the transfers were done by Raul Sanllehi. But actually, on the surface of it, there's some really good signings here, right? So, Bernd Leno, good goalkeeper, we all know that. Socrates maybe never quite reached his potential, but there was still reason to believe he would be good enough. And certainly, Unai Emery would go on to play him consistently throughout the season. Torreira, I was a huge fan when he came in. Exactly what we'd been crying out for so long, a defensive midfielder. Guendouzi hit the ground running, got everybody on side, had loads of energy, passion, good passing, a box-to-box energy that we'd been missing as well. And yeah, Lichtsteiner, for me, he kind of brought some solidity into a back four that had lost its way a little bit. But the outgoings at that point were Per Mertesacker, who obviously took up a role within the club, but Santi Cazorla left at the start of that season, and a little bit of the heart of the club went with him, but so did Jack Wilshere. Now, there is talk of Santi Cazorla coming back. I hope there's something in this, and of course Jack Wilshere is already back. So it's great to see that Arsenal players can come back and play a part and sharing what they know about football. But the 2018 season was not really any better. It was a horrible start to the season, followed by a glorious unbeaten run, and really started to look like Unai Emery knew what he was doing. The reality, though, is at the end of the season, we finished 5th, but we still had the Europa League final against Chelsea that could earn us Champions League football if we won it. Now, it's held in Baku, thousands of miles away, and I've got to say, for my money, arguably the worst game of football I've seen Arsenal play. Well, maybe not the worst game of football, but certainly the most disappointing game of football I've seen us play. Also, remember that we brought Unai Emery in because of his success in the Europa League, and now here he was at another final. Never lost a final. I was feeling pretty good about it. It was one, as I said, it's got to be one of the most disappointing matches I've ever seen. Certainly one of the worst finals. I mean, it's worse even than 2000 when we played Galatasaray and it came down to penalties. But that day we lined up with the following starting 11. Petr Cech in goal, his last ever game in goal as it turned out. Socrates, who'd been signed that summer. Koscielny and Monreal in a back three. Ainsley Maitland-Niles as a right wing-back, Kolasinac as a left wing-back, Torreira and Xhaka in the middle with Ozil just ahead of them, and up front, Lacazette and Aubameyang. It was Chelsea's final. They scored 3 goals in quick succession in the second half, put the game fully to bed, and although Iwobi was able to score an absolute cracker, Eden Hazard rounded off a fantastic display with the 4th goal to make it 4-1. Now, I just want to look at who was playing that day. It was an exceptional performance by Chelsea. They had Arisa Balaga in goal, Azpilicueta, Christensen, David Luiz, and Emerson on the full-back position. The midfield that really ran the show was Jorginho, Kovacic, and Kante, and up front they had Giroud at the point, with Pedro to the right of him, and Eden Hazard in a fantastic display. Never really looked like we had a chance. And so the sum total of all of the optimism around Unai Emery's appointment, which, look, let me be clear, I don't think anyone was over the moon about him being the Arsenal manager, but certainly most people preferred him to Arteta, and that's who it had come down to. But we went into the start of next season needing a big transfer window. One of the things that should stand out from that team of Ainsley Maitland-Niles and Kolasinac as wing-backs is there really wasn't any width. And Unai Emery had identified this, as apparently had Mislintat and Raul Sanllehi. It was clear that we needed to change the way we played, possibly more to a 4-3-3. It was Unai Emery who wanted Wilfried Zaha. And so Raul Sanllehi went out to get Wilfried Zaha, but Crystal Palace were not negotiating. They initially asked for 100 million and they wouldn't accept instalments. So even though there was hope that this might come down to 80 million, it would have been an 80 million upfront payment. And that's who Unai Emery really wanted, but Raul Sanllehi took the decision that actually he was going to go for a plan B. And that plan B was Nicolas Pèpè. Now, it's obvious to look back at it now and we think, how did anyone think that Nicolas Pèpè was going to be the right player for Arsenal? He had done very well at Lille. Well, looking at it, in fact, in his first season, full season at Lille, having worked his way up through the ranks of different league football in France, he'd scored 14 goals and 4 assists and had developed that kind of fast-running, exciting winger who liked to catch teams on the break and run into space. In his second season at Lille, he scored 23 goals and 11 assists, finished in Ligue 1 goal-scoring charts only behind Kylian Mbappé, and was one of the top 4 scorers in Europe's top 5 leagues. He was heavily sought after. And despite the fact that Napoli offered 10 million more for Nicolas Pèpè, Arsenal were able to seal the deal with 72 million, and importantly, Lille would accept instalments on those payments. Now, this happened because when he found out about the interest from Arsenal, Nicolas Pèpè's entourage and Nicolas Pèpè really forced through the move. So Gomez, who was chief executive of Lille, actually was afterwards interviewed and said Arsenal did a hell of a deal. Having said that, though, things were not going completely to plan. When Nicolas Pèpè was announced, it was universally hailed as a great signing and putting us back in the big boys league. It was obviously our record signing ever, Aubameyang having been up until then the highest we'd paid. And it signalled a chance for us to play 3 at the front, which has, of course, become the popular formation. It was felt that with Pèpè on the right, with Lacazette in the middle, and Aubameyang coming in from the left, we would have a forward line to terrify oppositions. Here's a few clips of what people were saying.
Everybody wants him. It's a coup.
It's a massive signing.
I thought he was exceptional. He's had great numbers. Last season for Lille, 22 goals, 11 assists. Only Messi managed to get 20-plus goals and those kind of assists, and it tells you the kind of players and calibre that he's around. I was very impressed with him. Got tremendous pace, works hard for the team as well, wants to play on that right-hand side because he's got so much quality. Now, I think he's capable of being a real hero at this club, and derby games, there's nowhere better to do it.
How do you think this is going to work, Jose? For the first time, a front three of Pèpè, Lacazette and Aubameyang, particularly featuring this young man, who the Arsenal team are still getting to know a little bit.
Yeah, but this player is really good. He's very cold, he's very cool in front of the keeper, and I think this boy has a fantastic potential. And to playing like they did last weekend at Liverpool is a bit out of his natural habitat, but if they play like today, I think they are going to play with 3 midfielders and then Pèpè, Lacazette, Aubameyang with him on the right, coming to the inside, looking to the movements in diagonal from Aubameyang, the left to the inside. I think they can make really a force for them.
So as you can see, hardly anyone is out there saying this is a terrible signing. But things do not gel for Unai Emery, and with the fans increasingly frustrated, Unai Emery's last game was a home defeat to Eintracht Frankfurt in the Europa League, and there was hardly anyone in the stadium, and the Kroenkes acted. And this time Stan Kroenke decided he was going to go with the man who his gut had told him was the right man for Arsenal, and that was Mikel Arteta. Mikel Arteta came in just before the turn of 2020. Well, and we all know what Mikel Arteta did in coming in, but we also know that Mikel Arteta, from things that Nicolas Pèpè has said recently in the papers and interviews he's given, that Mikel Arteta came with a fresh approach. He came with a fresh approach to Ozil, who had fallen out of favour under Emery. He came with a fresh approach to Nicolas Pèpè and talked about just how important it was going to be to unlock Pepe's potential. Now, the initial signs under Arteta were really promising, and Nicolas Pèpè was instrumental in winning us the FA Cup. But it became really clear that Arteta's system relies very much on a high work rate, even from the wingers, kind of a bit like the old George Graham. And Nicolas Pèpè didn't display that. He was not a player that was as comfortable working to track back. And after a little while, other players started to jump in and show that they could do that. And one of them was Saka, who was only 19 at the time. So increasingly, Nicolas Pèpè was marginalised in the second season. And, well, we all know what's going to happen from there. The reason Nicolas Pèpè was signed was because the fans needed something to lift them. But it was also fundamentally about the fact that every manager could see that we were desperately lacking in width and unable to play the 4-3-3. We didn't have the personnel to play it. Thomas Lemar, by the time Unai Emery comes in, has already moved to Atletico Madrid. And it's interesting and worth noting that he hasn't had a good time at Atletico Madrid either. Wilfried Zaha, we'll never know. He's available right now. It seems that he's just too old and he's working on other projects, which means he probably wouldn't be fully focused. It looks to me like he may even stay at Crystal Palace, and it'll always be a might have been with Wilfried Zaha, an exceptional player that I think really would have fit the system perfectly well. Crystal Palace just priced us out of that one. Nicolas Pèpè is a good footballer. There's no question about that. He has drive and determination. Something wasn't right at Nice for him. I hope he goes on to find a club where once again he can run into spaces, a counter-attacking football style that suits his game. But for all the people who think that we should hold on to him for one more season and just see if it works for him, I think we've seen enough. Hasn't been a disaster, hasn't been as bad as, let's say, Richarlison at Spurs, who I think has to go down as one of the worst transfers of all time, surely. But he has not, but he doesn't have the potential to fit into Arteta's future planning. And I think we've reached the end of the road. £72 million for 4 years, one FA Cup, one not so brilliant season where he didn't get quite as many minutes as he probably wanted. A third season on loan to Nice where he really didn't set the world on fire, and a contract termination. Will go down for a long time as Arsenal's worst transfer, although he is about to be overtaken as our biggest transfer. And that's something. Nicolas Pèpè, I wish you well. I hope you find a club. And I'm not going to lie, part of me does hope that he stays on at Arsenal in this final season and comes off the bench now and again and terrifies the kind of defences that it's not going to happen, though, is it? All the conspiracy theories around Raul Sanllehi getting a bung or a kickback. This was true of his time at Barcelona. Perhaps there is some truth to it, but Tom Watson came in and did a thorough examination on behalf of the Kroenkes, didn't find any irregularities. Now, there are two stories as to why Raul Sanllehi left. One is that he was kind of pushed because the club wanted to go in a direction with Edu and Arteta, reprising the kind of work that David Dein and Arsene Wenger had done. And the other story is that, of course, Raul Sanllehi thought that the Kroenkes were making a terrible mistake in making 55 people redundant. I'm going to leave it up to you to decide which, but I will weigh in here and say that it's quite obvious that the Kroenkes' plan has been to have Edu and Arteta working very closely on this. And Arteta's promotion from first-team coach to manager would lend credibility to that. it's a really exciting development for Arsenal, because I think a manager knows what he wants up front, and if he has a great reputation with, and if he has a great relationship with someone like Edu, the two of them are working really well together. They haven't put a foot wrong. Now, a bit of a surprise around Kai Havertz, of course, but I think I'm going to be doing a video a little bit later on, so stay tuned for that, where I'll be explaining where I expect him to play on the tactics board. Anyway, thank you so much for watching up to now. Can't wait to hear what you think. Looking forward to all your comments, your likes, your subscribes. Don't subscribe, though, if this is the only video you're going to watch. Only hit subscribe if you're interested in watching others. All right? Be lucky. Lots of love.